At no point did I expect to have tears in my eyes while watching Be Kind Rewind. That involves a bit of a spoiler, so I will explain that at the very end. I won't go into any detail about that at any point soon. But I will say a little bit of history about my relationship with this film. I saw this film for my 16th birthday. Me and a friend went to the cinema to see it, and I remember liking it, but I couldn't really remember anything specific from it. And it's been 13, almost 14 years since I saw it, so I decided I'd give it another watch and see what it's actually like. And I'll be honest, in a way, it was better than I imagined in some parts, but the bits that I remember liking were a lot worse than I remembered, which sounds a bit peculiar, but it's not the film that I remember. Is that a good thing? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Written and directed by Michael Gondry, and stars Jack Black as a character called Jerry, and Yassine Bey as Mike. We also have Danny Glover as Mr. Fletcher, who is a character I'm particularly fond of. And the premise initially is pretty simple. All of these VHS tapes in a video rental store become wiped. And the reason they're wiped is because of something that Jerry does, Jack Black's character. And I'll say right now, it took me a long time to get on board with Jerry as a character. I could not stand him to begin with, and I have no memory of how I felt about him back in the day, but certainly watching it today, I did not like him. Could not deal with him for the most part, but I eventually began to warm to him, so stick with it if he does annoy you. But these VHS tapes all go blank, and these two store clerks, with the help of somebody else, decide that the only way they can keep this business going is to Swede them, which is a verb they've come up with completely off the cuff to mean refilming all of those films themselves. I won't mention every single film that they try and remake, but it starts off with Ghostbusters and then into The Lion King and then some others. They spend a lot of time showing us them remaking Ghostbusters. I do feel like the pacing in this film is sometimes a little bit off, but for the most part it's not too bad. How did they remake an animation? Well, the film asks that very question. I will let you watch it and find out, because it is worth watching and I will explain why in a moment. But yeah, the remakes are... A lot of the film counted on the remakes being good film choices. And for the most part, I think they picked good popular films that the average audience member would be able to recognise, ones with which they can resonate, and I feel like that aspect of it worked reasonably well. But it wasn't as good as I remember. It wasn't as funny as I remember. And that's also considering that I would be more aware of the films now than I would have been back then. I hadn't seen Ghostbusters at the time. I'd obviously seen The Lion King, but there are other films that they mention or other films that are referenced. There is a lot of talk about films in this, so if you're a film fan, you will certainly get a lot out of it, a lot of different references, things that will appeal to you. I will say if you're not a film fan, you probably won't like a lot of it, but it's still quite a good film. So the spoiler-y bit is kind of spoilery. Towards the end, well, I'd say maybe the final third, is less about them Sweding these films and more about them making their own films. Because what happens, and I did say spoilers, is that they actually get a writ from the court, or they're handed a writ from the court to basically sue them for kind of bootlegging in a way and plagiarizing these films, because they are copying every aspect of the film. And they decide then, okay, we will make our own film and tell our own story. And they decide to tell the story of Fats Waller, who is, as legend has it, he was born in that video store back in the day. And the final third is all about them coming together, a lot of members of the community making this film, telling this story, everybody playing their part, and we get to see them all watching this film, and the whole community is watching it being projected, and I did. That's the bit where I got a little bit emotional because, not because the film was amazing, but because these people came together. And for me as a film fan, as an artist, as a writer, watching people come together to create something, be proud of that something, and enjoy watching it, seeing it come together, and enjoying that completion. And also everybody coming together as a community. It just completely made me well up, and I hadn't expected that from the film at all. I had no recollection of that from when I watched it. In fact, it surprises me how little of this I could remember. And there are films that I've seen longer ago that I remember in more detail than I did this. What does that say about the film? I don't know. Would I recommend this film? Well, I'm hoping, because you listen to the spoiler, you've already seen it. But if you haven't, I would recommend it. I'm not going to say that you need to go out and see it right now, go and get the DVD. I'm not saying you need to see this, on your bucket list. But if you get the chance to see it, give it a go. The reviews are not actually as bad as I thought. It's 6.4 out of 10. And I was expecting a lot shorter. I was expecting something to be much lower than that. So, yeah, definitely seems to have kind of mixed opinions, because people I've spoken to have definitely not liked it, but online the reception seems to be pretty good. Mos Def's brilliant, Jack Black's brilliant, Danny Glover I think is amazing. He is the store owner, I don't think I mentioned that. And even though he's away from the store for most of it, they still managed to kind of keep him in it, which is something that I thought was very well done, and gave us some other locations and some other parts to look out for and to play with and enjoy. Definitely better than I remembered in some ways. Maybe not as funny as I remembered in others, but ultimately Be Kind Rewind is worth watching.